Have your attention, please. Eric is here. He's the founder of the Pacific Rim Conservation, where he currently serves as the executive director and the director of science. Yay, Pacific Rim. Yay. Eric earned a Bachelor of Science degree from Cornell University in 1988 and a Master of Science degree from the University of Florida in 1992. He earned a PhD at the University of Hawaii in 1999. Eric has worked on a variety of conservation and ornithological projects in Hawaii and the Pacific Rim since with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Hawaii Division of Forestry and Wildlife. He's authored over 150 scientific papers, book chapters, discovery documents, and technical reports. Eric started Pacific Rim Conservation in 2006 because he saw a need for science-based management projects focusing on Hawaii and Pacific birds. So it's my great honor, and thank you, Eric, for coming to introduce Eric and let him tell us about his projects. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Susan, and for inviting me to talk tonight. I'm happy to be here, and thank you all for coming. As Susan said, I'm going to talk tonight about some of our conservation work with Hawaiian seabirds. The title of my talk is Translocation of Hawaiian Seabirds to High Islands to Mitigate the Effects of Climate Change, Operation Island Arc. If you Google Island Arc, I think our website still pops up. You might get other things too, but I think if you want more information, you can Google that, and our website will still pop up. And before I start, I just want to say that all the work I'm going to talk about tonight is really a group effort. I work for a nonprofit organization called Pacific Rim Conservation that I founded in 2006 after leaving the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And I've been fortunate enough to work with some really fantastic people over the years. There's our photograph from our most recent workday at James Campbell National Wildlife Refuge. On the left, those are our current staff, and on the right are some of our former staff. And we've also had a whole pile of interns and other people too. So all the work I'm going to talk about is really been a group effort, and none of this would have been possible without a team of very dedicated people. So most of what I'm going to talk about tonight is related to the threat from climate change on seabirds. I know you've all heard a lot about this. Hawaii is probably more vulnerable than many parts of the world to climate change because we're islands. And particularly seabirds that nest close to the ocean are especially vulnerable. And climate change is a threat to seabirds in a number of ways. First, obviously from sea level rise, and also increasing frequency and intensity of storms. High waves frequently wash over some small islands, wash away seabird nests that are close to the ocean. Also, saltwater intrusion into the aquifer and rising water tables are also a threat. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And all three of these forms of, all three of these effects can interact with each other in certain locations and make the combined threat even worse. So here's a map of the Hawaiian Islands. We're obviously on Oahu here, and there's the whole northwestern Hawaiian Island complex. And collectively, these islands form or support the largest tropical seabird colonies in the world. Literally millions of seabirds nest on these islands, and it's almost unrivaled today, the number of seabirds that nest on these islands. Unfortunately, most of these islands have a maximum elevation of like 5 or 10 meters. So sea level rise, storms are a huge threat to these islands and also to all the plants and animals that live on them. So this is, for many of the species on these islands, this is the most serious long-term threat to their persistence, is climate change. And I'll give a few examples of that. Here's a map from Reynolds et al. 2015. This shows the two main islands in Midway Atoll, Sand Island and Eastern Island, and the blue shading are areas that are expected to be inundated under various sea level rise scenarios. The top map, the top panel here, is just from sea level rise alone. The bottom map shows the effects of storm surges. So this is pretty serious. We don't know exactly how much of a rise there's going to be over what time period, but all these scenarios are bad. And particularly for Eastern Island, it may cease to exist in the not too distant future, or at least be washed over frequently enough that will not be usable for any sort of terrestrial wildlife. This photograph here is known as the parade field on Midway. That's right here, and there's a chance that that will be inundated within probably the next century. This is Eastern Island, which I just showed on the map, and this is a photo by Beth Flint taken in 2011. And this is that same spot after the tsunami caused by the earthquake in Japan. Now, this is a tsunami. This is not climate related, obviously, but similar things actually happen almost every year. Not quite to the same extent, but every year there are high wave events that wash away literally thousands of albatross nests on Midway and on other islands too. So this is more extreme, but not really exceptional. Things like this happen almost every year. This is also on Midway, and this is not a result of sea level rise directly, but this is groundwater flooding. So this was after a heavy rain, and this albatross's nest, the egg is sitting in water and is not going to hatch now. But this is because as the ocean level rises, rainwater, fresh water, cannot soak into the ground. The soil here is essentially sand. You would think that rainwater would soak in easily, but there's so much more seawater under the ground that the rainwater can't soak in. So this is another type of, this is a way that these two threats can interact. These are photographs of French frigate shoals, Tern Island specifically, which is another one of the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. This is what the island at least used to look like. It was originally a natural island, but it was modified during World War II to be more or less the size and shape of an aircraft carrier. And there was a seawall that was supposed to protect the island from waves. And you can see that it's badly corroded and is washing away, and this is allowing waves to enter the island. And this is a former building. These are big water tanks. This picture I think is 6 or 7 years old now. I've not been to Tern Island myself in several years, but I've been told that these water tanks are now in the ocean. They're gone. So the island is literally washing away, and as that's happening, it's taking seabird nesting habitat with it. One more example, and I promise there'll be good news later on. I'm just setting the stage here and telling you why this is important. So this is another islet within French frigate shoals. This was an island called East Island, and this was it in May 2018. And then in October 2018, a hurricane called Walaka went straight over it and almost completely washed it away. This is all that was left. And it occasionally reforms in some years now, depending on the currents and things like that, wave patterns. There is some accretion of sand that builds small islets back up, but they never last long enough. So there used to be about 2,000 pairs of black-footed albatrosses that nested on this island, and they can't nest there anymore. So most of the adults probably were not killed, but they can't nest there anymore. So for the species, this was a big loss.
Does any of that sand migrate back?
It does, and you can see in this photograph, so there's a sandbank underwater here that didn't really exist before. So that's where part of the island went, but it's complex. I mean, it changes from year to year. Each storm moves the sand around. So it definitely changes. But this is normal for an atoll. This happens all the time with atolls. That's just their nature. And it's okay if it washes away, builds up, washes away, builds up. But we have the cycle's been changed now. The washing away is more severe than the building up. So we've had a net loss. And this is true not just on this island, but in other places too. Okay. Now on to the more fun, hopefully, part of the talk. Sorry to be a little bit depressing there, but that's reality. That's what's happening. So this was, when I left Fish and Wildlife in 2006, this is one of the big issues that I had in my mind that I wanted to try to do something more about. And I didn't really know exactly what to do or how to go about doing it for quite a while. And it took a while. It took a number of years to really get a handle on what we can do. How can we make a difference? And we can't stop climate change, at least I couldn't individually, but what can I do to try to protect some of these birds that are being threatened by this issue? What we ended up calling this is Operation Island Ark, we wanted to have no net loss of habitat. So our goal was to protect as much habitat in the main Hawaiian Islands as is being lost in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And to do that, we wanted, after we'd done that, we wanted to create new seabird breeding colonies in that protected habitat. And to do it now, before these species become endangered, before it's too late. We have a window now where we can do this. For some species, it might be too late, but for many, it's not. We've got a chance. But the other big issue we had to deal with in the main islands is non-native predators. So almost all the birds I'm going to talk about used to breed in the main Hawaiian Islands, but were extirpated primarily by predators brought by people. So to create these new colonies, part of the protecting habitat is not just protecting it from sea level rise, but protecting the birds from predators once you put them there. So this is the other big issue we had to deal with. So how do you make a new seabird colony? This seems like kind of an impossible thing. How can you make a brand new seabird colony? There's essentially two ways to do it. One involves social attraction, and you've probably heard about this, especially with puffins. There's a famous example with puffins in North America, where you use decoys and a sound system to try to attract birds to a new place where you want them to nest. This is at James Campbell National Wildlife Refuge, and here's a lace albatross getting probably a little bit too close to the speaker. But this is essentially, it's a solar-powered sound system. So inside this box, there's a battery, there's a solar panel that powers the system, and underneath the solar panel is a Pelican case that has electronics that play MP3 files, and you can have it play whatever you want, day or night, and then it's broadcast through these speakers. This is a fairly common technique that's been used with a variety of birds. It works well with seabirds especially because most of them are colonial. They like to nest near others of their own species. So if they think there's other albatross here, they might come and check it out. Or if they, it only works at close range, obviously. You're not going to attract birds from 100 miles away. That speakers are not that loud. But if they hear the courtship calls of their own species, they might be encouraged to stay longer. So that's the real goal, is to encourage them to stay till another one shows up. And I can imagine this bird saying, hey, why are you looking at the speaker? Look at me instead. But the important thing is there's two of them there at the same time, and that's how you can get a colony started. The other way to start a new seabird colony is to move them there. This is often called translocation. And this is more often necessary in which colonies of your target species are far away. If they're not likely to visit on their own, you're probably going to have to move them there. Social attraction works best in species where they nest somewhere nearby, and also in species that don't have any post-fledging parental care. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. And it also, social attraction works best in species that don't have high natal site fidelity. This basically means what's the chance they'll come back as an adult to where they grew up, where they were raised. Some species almost always go back to the same place where they were raised to nest themselves. Other species, they have a less strong of a tie to that location. So depending on the biology of the species involved and also how close existing colonies might be, one or the other of these techniques is going to be more effective. You can also use both of them together, and that's what we've done in most cases, is use both techniques. So the next big question was where? If we want to start creating new seabird colonies, where can we do this? And the main site that we've done this so far is at James Campbell National Wildlife Refuge here on Oahu, on the north shore of Oahu. Here's a map. James Campbell Refuge is up here. And one of the good things about it, and this map is from a study that looked at inundation likelihood under, again, various climate change scenarios. The red is high likelihood, the yellow is low likelihood. And this whole area here is the refuge in general. And you can see it's less likely to be inundated than a lot of other areas on the North Shore. And the main reason is that there are very high dunes. There's a big dune system. So here's a dune that's probably close to 30 feet tall, and this helps protect at least this local part of the island from inundation. There has been predator control on the refuge for many years that's reasonably effective, but seabirds are especially vulnerable to predators, more so than many other birds. They're just naive. They don't know what a cat is. They don't know what a dog is. They don't even try to get away. If you've been out to Kaina Point, if you've seen albatross, you can just walk up to them They will not try to run away because they are not afraid of people. They should be, but they're not. But the other thing we did was to build a predator exclusion fence. This is a picture of it down here. This is a specialized fence that's capable of excluding all non-native mammals in Hawaii, all land mammals, not flying mammals, but dogs, cats, rats, mongooses, even mice. So this was and this red polygon here shows the section of the refuge where we built this fence, and that is the same polygon here. So you can see the risk of inundation is relatively low for at least most of the area. It's still quite close to the coast, which seabirds like in general, most seabirds, and this is what the habitat looks like inside. And I'll also add that just recently the refuge got funding to build, so our predator fence was 16 acres, and that's where all of our seabird restoration work has been going on, and that was built in 2017. Just recently the refuge got funding to build a 650-acre fence that will encompass almost the entire refuge. If you've been there, it includes all the ponds that are up there. So this would be a huge increase in the amount of area that's protected from predators. So that's a big deal. That's great news. These are the 4 species that we've worked with so far at the refuge. Lace-and albatross, black-footed albatross, Tristram storm petrel, and the bone-in petrel. So for all 4 of these species, the majority of the world population nests in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. For lace-and albatross and black-footed albatross, it's like 97%. Almost the entire global population nests in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. For Tristram storm petrel and bone-in petrel, they also nest on islands near Japan, south of Japan. But there's not a lot of good information about the population status on those islands, but most islands where they nest south of Japan have rats on them. So in the long run, they're not secure there. And especially because of some restoration efforts on Midway and elsewhere in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, the populations in Hawaii have grown a lot. So they now hold the bulk of the species population, but they're still at risk from climate change. So even though the populations are fairly large right now, they're still in the long term at risk. They're not endangered yet, but in 10, 20, 50, 100 years, we don't really know how long, they will experience major inundation because of climate change. So this map again shows all the Hawaiian Islands, and here's our release site where we're planning to release our seabirds on Oahu, and the red stars show the sources of where we got birds to try to create these new colonies. So we did translocation with all 4 of these species. Remember I described those 2 before. So we did translocations of all 4 species. We also did social attraction at the same time, and I'll describe why a little bit later. For the lace-and albatross, we received eggs from the Pacific Missile Range facility. Actually, wait, I'm getting, this map was just to show you where they all are. I have slides that talk more about this. So for lace-and albatross, this is the only one of the 4 species for which there are existing colonies nearby. They nest at Kaina Point on Oahu, and occasionally also at the marine base in Kaneohe. They nest on Kauai, and they nest on the Hua Islet near Niihau. So there are colonies nearby. So it's reasonable to expect that you can attract them. And they also nest at Turtle Bay, right next to James Campbell. So there was a decent chance we could attract them to the refuge, and we did so using decoys. And here's our sound system back here. And this graph shows the number of different lace-and albatross that visited over time. The numbers started small. We started this in 2014 to 15 season. Numbers went up, and they dropped a little bit. I'll say more about that in a minute. But we've had banded birds attracted from other areas on Oahu, Kauai, Turn Island, Midway, and also even from Mexico. There's an albatross colony off Mexico. And we've had banded birds, and you can tell where they're from based on the color of their band and identify the individuals based on the number on that band. We had our first nest of a socially attracted lace-and albatross in 2019, and the numbers were growing and then suddenly dropped. Most of this drop is because more birds started nesting, so they weren't counted as visitors anymore. They were counted as breeders. So it's not really a drop. We still have good numbers visiting, and this is a photograph of the first chick that hatched on the refuge, which unfortunately was just outside our predator fence. You know, everything you try your best, and they still don't cooperate. But now actually, and the same pair still nests out just outside the fence. They're getting slowly closer, but we put traps around the nest to protect them from mongoose, and the chick has not been killed in any year, so that's good. Oh, I hit the self-destruct button. No, here we go. So translocation with lace-end albatross. So we did this for 3 years, from 2015 to 2017, and we used eggs that were collected from the Pacific Missile Range facility on Kauai. And at PMRF, the albatross nest on and right next to an active runway. So they are a significant airstrike collision hazard with aircraft. And for years, they would just removed all the eggs and destroyed them. And then in 2004 or 5, I forget now, the refuge biologists at Kilauea Point National Wildlife Refuge worked with PMRF to devise what we call the egg swap. So they would collect eggs from PMRF, candle them to find out which ones are fertile, and then in the colonies on the north shore of Kauai, especially Kilauea Point and some private lands, they would candle the eggs there too and figure out which ones were not fertile. Because there's always some proportion of eggs that are not fertile just for natural reasons. And they would swap out the infertile eggs with fertile ones from PMRF. So this was kind of a win-win. It avoided having to destroy fertile albatross eggs, and it also allowed the Navy to continue their operations in safety. Unfortunately, for a variety of reasons I won't go into, we were less able to place, and then, sorry, the biologists at Kilauea Point left, and the program was in danger of stopping, and PMRF contracted Pacific Rim Conservation to continue the work, and we've been doing it since 2011, I think. And that was going great, and then for a variety of reasons, did not have access to some of the colonies on Kauai where we had placed foster eggs in the past. And we instead brought them to Oahu. And this coincided with James Campbell National Wildlife Refuge acquiring a big strip of coastal land where a predator fence is now. They bought that land, I think, anyway, I don't know the year, but a few years before this, there were no seabirds present of any kind, but it was great seabird habitat. So we thought this is a great opportunity. We have seabird habitat with no seabirds in it. We have these albatross eggs that need a home. So we moved them from Kauai to Oahu. I did it again. This is a picture of an egg being candled, which basically means shining a bright light through it to see if it's fertile or not. This is a fertile egg. Here's the embryo in the middle and blood vessels leading out from it. So that's a fertile egg. We packed them in specially padded coolers. They stayed in my basement and incubator for a few days, and then we placed them in foster nests at Kaena Point. And the foster parents hatched them. Here's a foster egg hatching. And then when the chicks were about 3 weeks old, and these were the foster nests here were again eggs in which the natural egg was not fertile. So we gave them a temporary foster egg. They hatched it, and then when the chick was about 3 weeks old, we moved it to James Campbell. And this is where the hard work began. We had to raise it by hand, feeding it every day for 4.5 months. So it's a lot of work. And all the people that I listed on the first slide back there, they're the main ones that fed all the seabirds. So this is a lot of work. Raising a seabird is not a small commitment. For albatross, it takes months. And they eat about 15% of their body weight every day. So we made fish and squid smoothies. That's what they mostly like to eat. And we tried to replicate their natural diet as close as we could. So we blended up fish, squid, salmon oil, vitamins, Pedialyte into a smoothie. And it had to fit through a syringe. I'll show a picture of that in a minute. So for black-footed albatrosses, this was a species that the only colony in the main islands is on Lehua Islet, north of Niihau, and it's a very small colony. So there was not a very high chance of attracting them to nest on Oahu. So for this species, translocation was really the main method by which we hoped to establish a new colony. And we did this for 4 years, from 2017 to 2021. The chicks were collected from Midway, and we collected them from areas of the island that were subject to inundation, where the nest had very low chance of surviving anyway. So the chicks we collected probably would have died. They would have washed away. And this is an area called Frigate Point on the northern tip of Sand Island, where we collected a number of chicks from. And you can see this is the, so here's the beach down here, obviously. This is like a sand berm that is washing away. When we first started this work, this PVC pipe was not exposed at all. And over the course of just 3 years, it's eroded back that far. It's eroded back even farther since then, but any nest that would have been there would have washed away. And here you can see here's an albatross that literally has fallen down the slope. I don't know if it had a nest before, but anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that the chicks we collected were not going to survive anyway. So there was no impact to the source colony. And we took them when they were about 3 weeks old, and this is important. So for translocation to work, you have to collect the birds before they imprint on what they view as their natal site, before they know what home is. And the age of imprinting varies among different species of seabirds. For albatrosses, based on work done by Fisher on Midway in the 1960s, we know that albatrosses imprint sometime between 1 and 3 months of age. So if you want them to stay where you put them and go back there when they're an adult, you have to move them when they're less than 1 month old. So that's why we collected them when they were 3 weeks old. Gave us about a week of leeway there. And here's 2 chicks in a plastic pet carrier. So they were flown to Oahu on a plane, and again raised by hand. So that's why we have to raise them for so long. You can't move adult albatross. You can, but they'll just go back to wherever you took them from. They have a very strong homing instinct. Once they're imprinted, once they have decided what they view as home, you really can't change that. They're very stubborn that way. Bone-in petrel, haven't talked too much about this yet. At least 90% of the global population nests in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, primarily on Midway. There's thought to be about 1 million bone-in petrels on Midway now. We moved them for 4 years, from 2018 to 2021. Again, the chicks were collected on Midway. They nest in underground burrows. There's me having just pulled one out of its burrow. And in this case, and that's what we weigh them just as we're collecting them, place them in the blue pet carriers. And here, this is on Oahu. We build seabird condos, like four unit condos that we put them in. But for these underground nesting species, the imprinting is very different. It's thought that they imprint on their natal site when they emerge from their burrow for the first time, and especially see the nighttime sky. So the constellation of stars in the nighttime sky is one of the main cues they use for imprinting. There are others too. Probably olfaction is involved. Landmarks are probably involved. But the nighttime sky is thought to be the most important. So you have to collect them before they come out of their burrow. And unless you have a colony that's monitored very well and you know exactly when they come out, we didn't want to take a chance that some chicks had already emerged, already imprinted on Midway. So we collected them about a month before fledging. Sorry, this is a typo. This should say a month before fledging. And that's when we moved them to Oahu. And they were also flown from Midway. The last species, Tristram storm petrel, this is a bird that probably not many people in the world know anything about or have ever seen. We moved them also for 4 years, 2018 to 20, and then we missed 2021 because of COVID. We did most of this work during COVID, which made it a lot more complicated, but in general, it mostly still worked out. They were collected from Turn Island, that I showed pictures of before, collected about one month before they emerged from the burrow. But in this case, there's no way you can land an airplane on Turn Island. There used to be an airstrip, but it's not functional anymore. So we moved them by ship. And this is a photograph. This is actually on Midway, but it's the same ship. We put the birds inside this shipping container, and then it was lifted by crane onto the ship. But it was a 3-day voyage from Turn Island, 5 days from Midway, and you have to feed them on the way. These are baby birds that have to eat every day. So that meant this is inside the shipping container. This is me and my colleague Robbie. The birds are inside these boxes. We had to take them out and feed each one with a syringe while the boat's moving around. It was very challenging, but it worked in general. Here's some more pictures. Here are our seabird condos at James Campbell Refuge. I built these in my garage and then we dug holes through them. We had our interns dig holes, and then buried them in the ground. They have a double lid system to help shield them from the sun so it doesn't get too hot inside. And here is one of our young volunteers helping to take one of the chicks out of its burrow for feeding. And here's another picture. So this is what the feeding looks like. This is a bone-in petrel, and this is a Tristram storm petrel. Here's the tube. There's a syringe on the other end that you gradually push the plunger on and dispense the food into the bird's esophagus. This is a delicate operation. So Robbie, my colleague, he is an absolute expert at this. He's trained all of our other staff to do this. You can't get even a drop down the trachea or the bird can choke on it. So it has to be done very carefully. It's a delicate operation, but in general it was very effective. And I said we feed our birds every day. Naturally, they would not be fed that often. Their parents, especially albatross, might only feed them once a week. And then other times they're out at sea feeding and they come back, the male and female take turns. So that results in a chick's weight, going way up right after it gets a meal and then slowly declining, then going way up and slowly declining. So their growth occurs in spurts. And that's not actually the best way to grow a big, strong, healthy bird. It's better for them to be fed every day, like we did. And the chicks that we raised, on average, were heavier, had longer wings, and fledged at a younger age than natural chicks. So I like to think we did a better job of raising these birds than their parents would have. But we have the ability to do that. The birds don't have access to a freezer full of fish like we do. That doesn't guarantee they're going to survive, but we think that gives them a bit of a head start. So here are the results of all that work. The four species here on the left, these are the abbreviations: Laysan albatross, black-footed albatross, Tristram storm petrel, bone-in petrel. The number we translocated, the number that fledged, and then the fledging rate. So in general, this is pretty high, especially for bone-in petrel. We fledged 99% of the chicks that we moved. And even the lowest one, Tristram storm petrel, this is still much higher than the natural fledging rate would be. For most of these species in natural nests, it would be 40, 50, maybe 60% in a good year. So anyway, like I said, we raised above average chicks. And then the most important thing is that they return. We want them to return to this site as an adult and breed there someday. So this is the number that have returned so far, and the percent that have returned. So for Laysan albatross, I don't think we're going to get any more back. Albatross in general start returning to their colony, or start returning to land when they're 3, 4, maybe 5 years old. And after that, if you haven't seen them, they're probably not going to come back. For black-footed albatrosses, we're still seeing new birds show up. In fact, I heard from one of my colleagues just this morning, they saw a black-footed albatross at James Campbell today that we had not seen back before. So this is, I should have increased this to 32. Didn't get to do that yet. Anyway, those numbers will still go up. The Tristram storm petrels and bone-in petrels, these are underestimates of the return numbers. And the reason for that is that when these birds have come back, we had hoped that they would all nest in the nest boxes we had provided. That's where they fledged from. And some of them have, but it's been less than half. So when they come back, most of them prefer to dig their own burrow, which is fine. That's what they would do normally. But it makes it a lot harder for us to check on them. If they're in those boxes, we just open the lid and go, oh yeah, there it is. And you can pick it up, read the number, you know exactly who it is. Some of the bone-in petrel burrows are 3 meters long. So we can't even see to the back. We have a burrow scope we can use to look inside, but we can't read the number with that scope. So we don't know who they are. So about half of our bone-in petrels have not been identified. So this number is an underestimate. We know more have come back than that. But overall, we're pretty happy with these results. Certainly with the fledging rate and also with the return rate. In general, it worked like we had hoped it would. And then the final result is breeding. We want these birds to breed here and form a new colony. And this slide summarizes that. So for Laysan albatross, this is the age at first return. I got ahead of myself. This is the age at first return. And the number that have come back over time. So for Laysan albatross, the average age of first return was 5.7 years. For black-footed albatross, 5.0. Tristan storm petrel, 2.9. And in general, the age of first return scales with body size. So their lifespan and also the age at which they start breeding is related to their size. So albatross are big, they live a long time, and they start breeding late. The storm petrel and bone petrel are smaller. They probably don't live as long, but they start breeding earlier at a younger age. So this is when they started coming back. And this slide now shows the number that have bred at the refuge so far. And for Laysan albatross, this is a bit of a mystery. We've had as many as 9 nests, but none of them were from translocated birds. They were all socially attracted birds. So overall, the project is working, but so far all birds that have been attracted there, not the ones that we moved there. We're seeing them come back, but they haven't nested yet. Hopefully that'll still happen. We're not totally sure why that is, but fingers crossed this year we'll get our first nest of a translocated Laysan albatross. For black-footed albatrosses, remember the average age of first return was 5 years. We stopped this project in 2022. So for a lot of these birds, it's too early for them to nest yet. They're still coming back. And we were very excited last year to have the first 3 nests of black-footed albatross at the refuge. One of those 3 nests was successful and fledged a chick. The other 2, 1 egg was not fertile, and 1 egg died early on in development. We don't know why. But that's not uncommon for young parents. For first-time breeders, their success rate is a little bit lower. Tristan storm petrels we've not had as many nests. The nest success rate has been good. We're still hoping this number will increase. But at least we have them coming back, and they are breeding. So it's working, and we're still hopeful that we'll see more new birds come back and that more of them will nest. The one species that is just really doing well is the bone petrel. So this is the number of nests, and the blue line, and then the red line shows the number of successful nests, and they're increasing rapidly. So higher return rate, higher proportion of returning birds nesting, and the highest nest success rate of any of the species. So that's the one species that really has done the best so far. So that's kind of the end of this first part of my presentation. I'm going to move on to a similar but different project next. This is the funding, permits, logistical support for the work I just talked about. And next I want to talk about another project that we've done more recently. And this is translocation of black-footed albatrosses from Midway to Guadalupe Island in Mexico. So this is a project we started more recently. It's still ongoing. And this was an international collaboration between a number of different organizations and government agencies in the US and Mexico. And here's some of the crew on Midway, and here's some of the crew in Mexico. And this has been, for me, a hugely rewarding international collaboration at a time when our relations with Mexico were not always that great. So it was really just a pleasure to work with everyone there, and it's been successful thus far, as I'll show you in a minute. So this was we did almost all of this project during COVID, which made it very complicated. So entering and leaving Hawaii was not simple. Getting to and from Mexico was even harder, and doing that while you're carrying bird eggs is harder still. But every agency, no one bent any rules for us, but they were all super helpful in helping us get the permits that were required, helping do the inspections at each step of the way. So the agencies were all super helpful in getting this work off the ground and then successfully implemented. So I'm really grateful to all these organizations, and without their support, it really would not have been possible. So a little more background about the black-footed albatross. The total breeding population is thought to be about 57,000 pairs, of which about 56,000 nest in Hawaii. There's about 1,500 pairs on an island south of Japan. The largest colony is on Midway. The non-breeding range covers most of the North Pacific. These are figures from Arata et al. 2009. This is during the breeding season. This is during the non-breeding season. And these are birds that were tracked from different sites within Hawaii. But what I want to, and you can see in the non-breeding season, they have a huge range from the Bering Sea to the tropics, from close to Japan to the west coast of North America. and a lot of them spend a lot of time off the west coast of North America. But even in the breeding season, birds that were tracked from Tern Island, some of them went to California to forage. And they would do this repeatedly. They'd go back and forth over and over and over. They would get food to feed their chicks from California. So that tells you two things. California is a really rich foraging area, and they don't have to nest in Hawaii. Oh, I did it again, self-destruct button. Okay. So in 2011, the Fish and Wildlife Service held a structured decision-making exercise led by Beth Flint to try to come up with strategies for increasing the resiliency to climate change of the black-footed albatross. And they recommended, among other things, that new colonies be created by translocation or social attraction at several different locations. And they specified that there be 2 sites in the main Hawaiian Islands. We've done that at one, at James Campbell. It's just starting, but we're on our way, hopefully. At 3 islands in Mexico, and that's the project I'm talking about right now, and then also on 2 islands in California. And that has not happened yet, but I'm talking to people about it. I published a paper about the possibility of establishing a colony in the Channel Islands of California. I think we're still a few years off from being able to do that, but we're at least having discussions about it. So this is another graph that shows this figure. The purple is Laysan albatross. This is from Michelle Kappas et al. 2014. And these again are birds tracked from Tern Island, and black-footed albatross in the orange and red color. You can see birds that are nesting in Hawaii sometimes forage in California. They go to the California current. And this is not a difficult trip for them. You know, the albatross, they're made to fly. They're really, really good at it. They can cover hundreds of miles a day. So flying to California and back is not a big deal for them. They can do that, I won't say easily, but they do it regularly. But the California current it's a hugely rich environment for many species, and importantly, it's expected to be affected less and maybe differently by climate change. And part of the reason is it's driven to some degree by upwelling. And this upwelling is going to be less affected. Anyway, the temperature is expected to change less. And albatross in general prefer colder water. Their preferred prey like colder water. So there's a good chance that in the distant future, the California current will be a better foraging area than other parts of the Pacific because it's expected to be affected less. We don't know for sure. Time will tell. But all else being equal, you want to have more chances. You want to have 2 horses in the race. So we don't want all our albatrosses nesting in Hawaii and then have the area north of Hawaii suddenly not be so good. If we can get them to nest in California or Mexico, you give them another way to be resilient to climate change, and we could make their commute a whole lot shorter. So that's what we set out to do, was to establish a colony somewhere in the eastern Pacific to increase the resilience of the species to climate change. And the place that we chose to do that is Guadalupe Island. So here's a map of, this is Baja California, here's San Diego. Guadalupe Island is here. It's about 200 kilometers southwest of Ensenada, and it's a big island, 244 square kilometers, a high island, almost 1,300 meters in elevation. So sea level rise is not really an issue there. It's a huge island, and it's been protected as a biosphere reserve since 2005. It's a sister park to the California Channel Islands National Park. They share many species of plants, some species of animals, so it's similar in many ways to the Channel Islands. There's been extensive restoration efforts going on, including eradication of goats, a revegetation of the island. They built a cat exclusion fence in 2014. They actually sent biologists to Hawaii to look at our predator fence at Kaina Point to better understand how to build one. And then they built their own for a whole lot less money. But anyway, and this is a picture of that fence. So in the past, predation by cats was a problem. The nesting albatross is there. But since this fence was built, that's pretty much stopped. It's a big rugged island, a beautiful island. Here's some pictures of it. There's an albatross flying there. I hear Rich's pileated woodpecker. A little more background on Guadalupe Island. So Laysan albatross colonized the island in 1983. And like I said before, at first predation by feral cats was a big issue. but after the cat fence was built, mostly that problem was solved. They're working on complete eradication of feral cats, and they're making good progress. And the staff there are extremely dedicated, and I fully expect that they will succeed, hopefully within just a few years. There was a single black-footed albatross nest on the island in 1998. It failed because the parents were killed by cats. So if that hadn't happened, there might be a colony there right now, and wouldn't have to do all this. But anyway, they were killed. There were occasional visits to the island by black-footed albatrosses through 2009, but none since then. And our colleagues in Mexico tried social attraction for a number of years, and it really didn't work. Not really sure why, because we know they foraged nearby, but they were just not visiting the island. So it was decided that translocation would be needed to create a colony there, and we, through a whole series of meetings, agreed that Guadalupe was the best place, and we worked out the methodology, and our goal was to try to fledge at least 100 black-footed albatrosses on Guadalupe to provide enough founders for a new colony, that Midway would be the best source. It's the largest colony, and as I explained before, we can remove birds from there with negligible impact to the source colony because we'll take them from places where they wouldn't survive anyway. It's also acceptable by plane. We've worked out the logistics because of our previous work in Hawaii. The one thing we did not know was whether it would be best to move eggs or chicks. Eggs are a whole lot easier to move. You don't have to feed them on the way, but we didn't know how that was going to work. And what we eventually ended up doing was moving some eggs, which we cross-fostered into lace-end albatross nests. Remember, there's a lace-end albatross colony on the island, so they were available as foster parents. So that was going to be a lot easier, but we're a little bit worried about two things. Would the black-footed albatross chicks be recognized by their parents once they started growing black feathers? When they're chicks, they look almost the same. You almost can't tell them apart. But when they're like 3 months old, they will suddenly have all black feathers and look very different. We had no idea whether the parents would object to that or not. We also did not know if the black-footed albatross chicks, if they're raised by a different species, would they imprint on that different species? Would they think they're lace-end albatross and not black-footed albatrosses? So there were two big unknowns there that we really didn't know the answers to. So we tried both. We moved some eggs and some chicks. In 2021, 21 eggs, 12 chicks, and then you can see what happened. We decided eggs were the best, and I'll explain why in a minute. So on Midway, I talked about some of this before. The eggs and chicks were collected from areas subject to inundation. This is our veterinarian, Adrian Pesquet. This is that same area I showed before. Sometimes it's fairly cold on Midway. We're wearing jackets. We really needed them. But we're collecting the chicks from this area where they're probably going to wash away. And the eggs and chicks of the desired age, those nests were marked by colleagues with Fish and Wildlife before we got there, which saved us a lot of time. We didn't have to check every nest. And if we saw a chick, we didn't have to wonder how old it was. It had already imprinted. They marked the nest for us on the day the egg was laid. So we knew exactly how old they were. The eggs we collected in mid-January, 2 to 3 weeks before hatching. Eggs are much more vulnerable to addling shortly after they're laid and shortly before hatching. When the chick is almost ready to hatch, it's much more likely to become injured. So we didn't want to move it right then. So at least 2 weeks before hatching, preferably 3 weeks, we packed the eggs in these custom-made padded incubators. The chicks again went in these pet carriers, and the chicks were again collected when they were about 3 weeks old. So in this case, we weren't just stopping on Oahu. It was a series of 4 flights totaling over 4,000 miles to get them to their final home. So starting in Midway and then arriving in Honolulu, and then from Honolulu to San Diego to Tijuana, Tijuana to Guadalupe. Here's a picture along each step of the way. On Midway, all the flights come and go at night because during the day there's thousands of albatross flying around and there's too much chance you could hit one. So all the flights go and come at night. That's why the picture's at night. And here's our incubators with our eggs inside. This is Honolulu. For the Honolulu to San Diego leg, they went on Hawaiian Airlines on a commercial flight, And Hawaiian Airlines was super helpful to us. In the first year, they gave us seats for free. They didn't do that in the subsequent years, but that's okay. They helped us deal with security, which was not a simple thing, getting the eggs and chicks through security. They have to be inspected, all that kind of thing. So Hawaiian Airlines staff was super helpful to us in getting through all that quickly. San Diego, they got on another small plane and fly to Tijuana, which is about a 15-minute flight. But the reason we had to do that is all the inspections we had to do in Mexico, all the customs, could only be done at the airport because the inspectors worked at the airport, not at the land crossing. They might have been able to get the inspectors to the land crossing, but the line to go across the border is unpredictable. Sometimes it's hours long. And especially with the chicks, we could not afford to sit there for hours in line waiting to get across. So we flew across, short flight. When we arrived, the eggs had to be inspected. This stretched my Spanish-speaking ability. Our colleagues from Mexico were supposed to meet us. This is out on the runway. We literally just got out of the plane. We put the incubator on the tarmac, and the inspectors come out. Before they're allowed to enter the country, they have to inspect them. So I had to explain what was going on. And the first year was a little bit challenging. But after that, it was the same inspector each year, so they knew what to expect, and it went fine. Anyway, it all worked out. We got the eggs in, and then the last flight is also on a small plane. The airstrip on Guadalupe is a gravel airstrip, but it worked out fine, no problems. And then on Guadalupe, the release site was at Punta Sur, the very southern tip of the island where the cat exclusion fence is, and the release site was inside there. They have so we had to, there is a road, but it's very rough, and we ended up walking more than half of it because we didn't want the eggs to be jostled too much during the trip, so we walked with them in the incubators. And they have a really nice field station painted with albatross on the outside, and albatross nest right outside. So this has been my colleagues in Mexico have a long-term study with Laysan albatross there. They've done a really excellent job on the study, and they literally walk out their door and some of their study nests are right outside. So they're really lucky in that respect. It's a beautiful place. And here's my colleague Julio Montoya, and he's got two eggs here. One is the black-footed egg and one is a Laysan egg. You can't tell them apart. They look exactly the same. And I joke with Julio that he's telling albatross, you can keep your own egg if you can tell me which one it is. But of course they can't. They cannot tell their egg from another egg from a baseball. They will sit on any round, vaguely egg-shaped object. They have a really, really strong instinct to sit on an egg. They really want to do it. So this is a good thing for us. We've never had any albatross reject a foster egg. They always take them. Even if they had a chick before that died, if you give them an egg, they'll sit on it. They're very flexible in that respect, and this makes our job a little bit easier. So this was actually a two-step switch here. So the black-footed albatross eggs were placed in foster nests with the oldest, most experienced parents. And our colleagues in Mexico knew this from their long-term research on the island. So we did this because we wanted the foster eggs from Midway to have the best chance of hatching and eventually fledging. And then if that foster pair, if they had a natural egg that was fertile, we would take that egg away and then find some other albatross pair that had an infertile egg. So it was a double switch. So we never ended up having to destroy any fertile Laysan albatross eggs, and that was one thing that we agreed on at the beginning. We did not want that to happen, and it didn't. But here we are. Oops, did it again. And then with the chicks, we fed them by hand. So in the cases where the eggs went into a foster nest, the foster parents did all the work, a lot less for us. With the chicks, they were fed by hand for 4.5 months. So the results, in 2021, we moved 21 eggs. 18 of those eggs hatched and all 18 chicks fledged, so that went really well. We moved 12 chicks. 3 died during transport. So between Midway and Guadalupe, 3 of the chicks died. And it was hard. It was just too much for them. It was too much stress for too long a period, and we decided to not do that anymore. And the foster parents So here in the top picture, here is a black-footed albatross chick, has black feathers, parents feeding it, no problem. They did not care at all what color their chicks were. They would feed them. Any chick in their nest, they would feed it. And they did a great job. And I think it really paid off putting them with the most experienced pairs, because the fledging rate was very, very high. So it was the oldest, most experienced pairs that had already fledged many chicks in their lifetime. And they did a great job with the foster chicks too. So in the last 3 years, 2022 to 24, we moved only eggs. It was way easier, way less stressful. We knew that the foster parents would raise them, and it worked really well. And the number of chicks that we fledged was 34, 32, and 34. So overall, we had 127 chicks fledged, 90% success rate, and we were really happy about that. And then this year, we were back on Guadalupe for a different project. And while we were there, 8 of the previously translocated black-footed chicks, well, not chicks, 8 of them came back to the island as adults. So 6 from the 2021 cohort and 2 from the 2022 cohort. And the returnees included birds that had been moved as eggs and chicks. So both methods worked. So that was good. And then another really important thing is that, at least in cases where 2 blackfoots showed up at the same time, they courted only with each other and not with Laysan albatross. So they had not imprinted on Laysan albatross, which is a huge relief to us. That was still the last big unknown. You know, if we raised all these birds, but then they thought they were Laysan albatross, that's not going to work. The product would have failed at that point. We'd have probably created a whole lot of hybrid hybrid albatross. And the other really exciting thing was that some of the birds that came back were less than 2 years old. So this is exceptionally young for albatrosses. They don't normally come back when they're that young. But I think one difference in this system is that they forage very nearby. There's nice, cold, prey-rich water right offshore. So they might be foraging close by and go, oh, look, there's the island that I hatched from. I'll just go have a visit. And they can do that easily. Whereas in Hawaii, they mostly spend their time thousands of miles away. They don't come back to the main islands except to nest. Otherwise, they're not usually close. So anyways, it's gone great. These are pictures of some of the birds that returned. The first 2 returning birds were named Hope and Bruno by our colleagues in Mexico. I don't really know why, but those are the names they chose. And they have become celebrities in Mexico. There were numerous news stories about this, TV stories. It's really being highlighted in the country. So it's been a great project. And I will stop there and take any questions if it's not too late. Thank you very much for your attention. I don't remember what time we're supposed to stop. I have no idea. So I don't know if I should just go sit down now, or if we have time for questions. I don't know what the plan is. Who's in charge? Okay, Susan says there's time for questions. All right, questions?
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised by the number of black-footed albatross in Hawaii.
In Hawaii and the main islands?
On your maps and distribution.
Yes. Yes, that's a good question. And the answer is we are seeing more of them now than we did before. So I think some of those birds that were displaced, say from East Island and from other islands, they're having to move. And some of them are coming to the main islands. So at our restoration site at James Campbell, we also see some unbanded albatrosses that are not part of our project. So they've come from somewhere else. We don't know where, some other island. And so they are showing up.
I saw a pair at the point, but it was February 2022.
Yes.
I haven't seen it since.
No, so Kaena Point, we had, so they're also visiting Kaena Point pretty regularly. There actually was a nest at Kaena Point 2 years ago. The egg was not fertile, so it didn't hatch, unfortunately. And then last year, the male never came back. So we're a little bit worried that it was killed as bycatch in a fishery. And this is a big problem for black-footed albatrosses, much more so than Laysans. They are very aggressive. They love to eat fishing offal, fishing bait. They're frequently caught. In terms of compared to their abundance, they're about 10 times more likely to be caught in fisheries bycatch as laysan albatross. And males are bigger and more aggressive than females. So just like with people, it's the young males that are most at risk. So they engage in risky behavior and they experience higher mortality. So we're worried that the male from the pair that nested at Kaina Point was killed somehow because he never came back. And even in I didn't show this data, but of the 32 black-footed albatrosses that have returned to James Campbell, 2/3 of them are females. So we have a sex-biased return rate, and I think this is also probably because of fisheries bycatch. We hope that there's still enough males to start a new, to keep the colony going. I think there will be. If this trend continues and we have too severe of a skew in the sex ratio, we're going to consider trying to bring more birds and trying to sex them while they're in the egg to make sure we're only bringing males, because that's what we need. So,
You can sex them in the eggs.
no, we don't know how yet, but we'll figure it out. We can do it. We'll figure out a way to do it. I'm confident. We don't know that that's necessary yet, but that's if that happens, that's what we'll try to do scenario. No. It'll be done in a lab. We'll take some sample and have it genetically sexed. I'm just not sure what the sample will be yet. It can't be eggshell. We have to get a sample from inside the egg somehow and do it hygienically so we're not compromising the egg itself. So I think it can be done, and I bet there's somewhere in the world somebody knows how to do this, probably a chicken farmer, and we need to just find them and figure out how they do it. Yes, question in the back.
The island in Mexico, you said that the black-footed comes out at age 2. Do the laysan albatross and all of these catfish, do they come back so early?
No, not quite. It's the age at first return for the laysan albatross is also younger than it is in Hawaii, but it's still like 4 years. So it's not 2 years. I didn't say all this, but Guadalupe Island is a really great place to be an albatross. The laysan colony is growing rapidly. This last year they had over 1,500 nests, starting from just one nest in 1983. But they also have the highest nest success rate of any albatross colony in the world. Not just laysan albatross, but any albatross colony in the world. In some years, 80% of the eggs that are laid result in a fledged chick. So for a seabird, that's very, very high. And I think it's because there's really good foraging areas very close by. So at Kaina Point, the chicks are fed on average about once every 7 to 10 days. It varies a lot. It might be 2-3 days, but then not for 2 weeks. So it's this boom and bust cycle. On Guadalupe, most chicks are fed every 2 or 3 days, sometimes every day, because the parents have this short commute. They can go right offshore, find plenty of food, come right back, feed the chick the same day. So this is in general a better way to grow a bigger, stronger chick. And the birds there can do it because there's so much food close by. So we hope that the black-footed albatrosses will have the same thing, that they can also forage close by. They'll have a high nest success rate, and we're hopeful that they'll start nesting there in 2, maybe 3 years. If everything keeps going according to plan, the way it has thus far, I'm hoping that they'll see the first nest on Guadalupe in 2 or 3 years. Yeah, Becky.
Do you know if the black-footed female stores sperm?
I do not know. I suspect they probably can. Many birds do. Don't really know. Yeah, this is one aspect of this whole project that I feel like we've not done a good job with. Is these are now fantastic research systems, and thus far we've kind of had like a hands-off approach. The main thing is that birds survive and come back and nest. We don't want to do anything that influences that. That's the most important thing, is that they're there. But now, especially with the bone-in petrels, it seems like they're established. They're doing very well. But these are now populations consisting entirely of known age individuals. We know the age and sex of every bird. We can monitor them pretty carefully. So these are now great study systems to answer a lot of questions in. And I think as the populations become stable and established, we can hopefully start to take advantage of that. But be a lot of things we could look at, and that would be one of them. There was a question somewhere else. Yeah.
On Midway, over a decade ago, I was looking to go to Wisconsin. I thought you were told there was some hybridization between the Laysan and the Blackfoot because there was some gray looking.
Yes.
It wasn't all white, all black. It was some gray.
That's right. They do hybridize. They're very closely related, and they can hybridize. There's some debate whether the hybrid offspring are fertile or not. They might not be fertile, or some of them might be and others not, but it's very rare. So each time I go to Midway, there's just in the course of a day you might see 500,000 albatross, literally, and you might see like 3 hybrids. So it's very rare. They do hybridize, and that happens in other bird species too. So it's not uncommon, but the rate of hybridization in these 2 albatrosses is not unusual. It's probably actually lower than in some species pairs. But that was why we're especially worried about the potential for misimprinting. In some species like whooping cranes, they wear puppets. They use puppets to feed them, or in condors. And part of the reason is they don't want the chicks to imprint on humans. They can also imprint on another bird species. So this was a concern. We didn't dress up as albatrosses when we fed the chicks. Maybe we could have had a costume made, and then that would have been great. It would have been very hot though. Anyway, turns out we didn't need to do that, but yeah. Yes?
Have any of your banded birds shown up anywhere else?
Absolutely, all the time. Albatross move around a lot. They're really good at it. So our birds have been seen on Midway, actually close to where they were collected, and one bird has stayed there. So one of our translocated black-footed albatrosses has decided to go back to Midway. And I don't think it's because it knows that it came from there. It's just by chance. It's only 1 out of like 100, and it was collected as an egg, so I doubt that it knew where it was when it was inside the egg. But they're seen on Hawaiʻi. They're also seen in Mexico. So a couple times on Guadalupe, we've seen one of our Laysan albatrosses with a purple band, which is from Oahu. So, but again for albatross, moving 500 miles, 1,000 miles, it's easy. They can do that in a couple days. They fly, when they're out in the ocean, they fly 24/7, and if the winds are 30 knots, they go 30 knots. And they do that 24 hours a day, so they can cover a lot of distance in a hurry. When they used to do at PMRF, before they devised the egg swap, they would move adult albatrosses along with the eggs to Kilauea Point on the north shore of Kauai. They'd move the adults too, just hoping they would stay, and then they never did. But sometimes the biologists doing that, when they got back to PMRF, the albatrosses they released at Kilauea Point were already back. So traffic on Kauai is bad. It's not a fast drive. And albatrosses could cover that distance faster in some cases. So they're made for flying a long way, and they're really good at it.
What's the average weight, say, like a 3-year-old albatross?
So an adult albatross, the males are a little bit bigger than females. The average is probably around 3 kilograms, maybe 2,800 grams. The chicks get up to a maximum of close to 4,000 grams. So they weigh a third more than the parents because they're big and fat. They're big bags of fish oil. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but then before they can fly, they have to slim down. All that fish oil gets turned into muscle, and the last couple weeks or maybe 3 weeks of their life is spent developing the flight muscles and losing weight to get down to fighting weight, we like to say. Yeah.
Have any of these albatrosses been seen in the California Channel Islands?
Not on the Channel Islands. So there's only been a handful of albatrosses at least in historical times, ever seen on the Channel Islands and only on San Nicolas. But they've been photographed at sea. So I have friends in California that send me photographs if they get a banded albatross on which they can read the band number. And I tell them where it's from. And a couple times it's been a bird from Oahu. So not on the Channel Islands, but in waters nearby. But in the archaeological record, the Channel Islands, they were heavily used by Native Americans. Native Americans went up and down the west coast of North America in these big voyaging canoes. And they easily went out to the Channel Islands. There are middens in the Channel Islands full of seabird bones. And there's lots of albatross bones, literally thousands of them. But 90% of the bones of albatrosses in the Channel Islands are actually short-tailed albatrosses, not laysan or black-footed. So there's a lot of speculation. Well, we know that before the short-tail was almost wiped out by feather hunting in Japan, they were much more abundant. They were actually the most abundant of the North Pacific albatross species. And they spent a lot of time off the west coast of North America. There's no evidence yet that they nested there. It's possible they did, but it hasn't been found yet. In the Channel Islands, there's a good chance that if there was a colony, it's now underwater, because when sea levels were lower, those areas are all underwater now. So anyway, Keith.
What other species do you hope to translocate and where?
What other species? So let's see. There's a long list of things I'd like to translocate all over the place. We've also translocated Hawaiian petrels and newel shearwaters on Kauai, and this is not for a threat from climate change. This is to create colonies that are inside a predator exclusion fence where they're not subject to predation by cats and rats. So we've kind of done that. I would like to move Christmas shearwaters. Also to James Campbell Wildlife Refuge. They're the only big colony for that species in the world that is not on an atoll is on Nihoa. And it's a big colony. There's a lot of them there. So in that sense, they're secure. But that's just one island. Someday if rats got to Nihoa, it would be a disaster, not just for that species, but for many. So it'd be nice to have another colony on a high island that's safe. There's not very many places where you can get a good number of Christmas shearwaters to translocate. Laysan would be the best source, and I'm actually trying to find a way to get out there on a boat that doesn't cost us $80,000. So anyway, that's one species. Another species that I have long-term hopes for is Polynesian storm petrel, which nests primarily in southern Polynesia, in Samoa, in a number of other islands. There is one bone of one Polynesian storm petrel that was found somewhere in Hawaii. Helen James is the one that told me about this. She can't remember which island it was. Someday we'll figure that out. But anyway, this is a species that's critically endangered. There's relatively few islands they nest on. All of them have rats. Well, maybe not all. Most of them have rats. So it's a species that really needs help, and especially if Hawaii was in the known historical range, to me that's good justification for putting it here. We need to figure out which island would be best, and then which site on that island. So we need a little more information, but in the long run, that's another species I'd like to work on.
A question on rats and monkeys. So we know they're a problem. There's been a variety of ways of exterminating them. You can shoot them, kill them, poison them. You can also sterilize them so that they react in a way. So how do those three choices affect the fact that they're mostly fish eaters, the water birds? Will they eat the rats or the mongoose? Because that would be, okay, they won't. So in theory, could we sterilize them and let them breed themselves away rather than exterminate? Yeah.
In my opinion, especially with rats and mongoose, you'd never get them all. You'd never sterilize all of them. And you would never sterilize a sufficient proportion of the population to where the numbers would decline. I mean, this is the whole TNR thing with feral cats. the numbers never go down. If you could get them all, then after that, the standing population dies, there should be none. But you never get them all. Yeah, and to me, the best solution on islands like this, where we're never going to eradicate feral cats or mongooses or rats from the entire island, I wish that we could. New Zealand has high goals of predator-free New Zealand by 2050. I wish them luck. It's a great goal. If anyone can do it, they can, but I'm a little skeptical. But to me, the best solution is these predator exclusion fences. They're not perfect. We used to call them predator-proof fences, but they're not predator-proof. They're predator-resistant. It's like your rain gear. Eventually, you still get wet inside. Even these predator fences, some predators get in some way. Either there's a hole in the fence, or they dig under the fence, or someone drives a truck in that has a rat inside it. There's biosecurity is a big issue. But in the long run, that is the best way to provide the highest level of protection for birds like this. And the other thing, and this is really more of an issue for cats than mongoose or rats, is if you just keep them out, there's no need to keep killing them. Once they're out, you're done. Mongooses and rats don't have as many allies as cats do, but the idea of putting up a fence to keep cats out instead of having to kill them is more acceptable to more people. Okay, time's up. All right, thank you all.